Compromise is a nasty word, particularly when talking about tech products. So when I say the MacBook Pro 16-inch is a series of compromises, that might not sound like a ringing endorsement. But laptops are fundamentally a compromise, because given identical prices, a desktop like the iMac Pro will always be more stable, powerful, and just less thermally constrained than a laptop. But for most people, including a lot of young and budget-conscious aspiring pros, a laptop is all they can manage if they need one machine to go with them anywhere. Apple had a good balance of power and portability going with the MacBook Pros, but with the controversial 2016 redesign, they seemed to shift that balance a lot more towards portability, making the battery in case size smaller and sleeker while throwing in more powerful processors without improving the cooling to match. So here we are in the year of our Lord 2019, after a lot of controversies, and Apple, well, they've compromised on their original vision, making their newest laptop thicker, heavier, and bringing back an old but trusted keyboard design that's more universally loved and reliable. And it's all for the best. I've been using the higher end of the base options as my computer for everything, combining it with an 11-inch iPad Pro equipped with Sidecar for having dual monitors on the go. And I have some thoughts. So first of all, keyboards are subjective, but I can just come out and say that this is, at the very least, a good keyboard. I have no complaints, and I actually really like the typing sound now. It's actually quite nice. The trackpad is characteristically brilliant for a Mac, and it preserves its enormous nature from the 2016 redesign, but that's okay, because the palm rejection software Apple uses is just solid stuff. Gaming aside, you really can just go without a mouse using the MacBook. The touch bar is more tolerable also now that it's not replacing the escape key, because you need to use it much less frequently. Unfortunately, it still freezes often, and Apple hasn't improved the hardware of it at all since 2016, so it still provides no haptic feedback. A lot of people complain about the touch bar, but I really still believe it could be really nice if Apple just bothered to give it a little more attention. On the plus side, a lot of third-party apps are using it now, although the implementation highly depends on the developer's taste and your ability to customize the touch bar. The T2 chip powering that touch bar, however, is more useful to everyone, because it provides real-time disk encryption. It even accelerates video rendering for certain tasks. It also makes data recovery a lot more difficult or even impossible, but given the extremely high-quality Samsung SSDs used in this laptop, I think you should be fine as long as you take a time machine backup now and then, which is just a good idea in general. The display is also characteristically great for a Mac, with one notable complaint. So the color management in macOS, it's great, and the display shows those colors accurately. It also still gets very bright. Unfortunately, the display setting out of the box is set to a scaling mode that doesn't pixel double. Instead, it uses a resolution higher than the native display and an anti-aliases to try to smooth out that image. But it's just not the same, and I personally made the decision to switch the native 2x scaling and sacrifice some of my screen space to have sharper text. Now, if you don't care about super crisp text elements and images, then you can leave it with the factory settings and deal with anti-aliasing. This is just a weird decision that screams of either cheapness or lack of care, and either of those are inexcusable on such an expensive laptop. Using this display with an iPad Pro on Sidecar, though, is a great experience. I just wish there was a way to match the True Tone toggle across both displays to make sure colors match when you're doing work that matters, instead of having to check each display individually. The battery life, by the way, is really good. The 11-hour claim Apple makes is obviously not going to fly if you're pushing it, especially with the 8-core i9 option, but it still gets pretty close if you're just using it casually. If you are pushing it, expect as little as 4 hours in those extreme situations. Now, let's talk ports, because that's one thing that has kind of stayed the same, and I have mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I love the versatility and just sheer bandwidth potential of Thunderbolt 3, but I also feel the pain of all the photographers, audio recorders, and other pros who just want the SD card to return. I understand Apple's justification for not wanting to have to be stuck to legacy formats, and it's true that there's a lot of competing media formats out there that aren't SD. There's XQD, there's CFast, etc. But I think a good solution to this, and the best solution, would just be more Thunderbolt 3 ports. Because why stop at 4? Even I find myself filling up all the ports thanks to the inconsistency of USB-C hubs and adapters. Apple either needs to make more good first-party USB adapters and hubs, or just give us a couple more Thunderbolt ports out of the box, because it's getting to the point now where 4 just isn't enough for some, even though that seemed like madness in 2016. The world really has largely moved to USB-C and Thunderbolt, so if Apple is so committed to it, I don't see the harm in them adding more ports, assuming that the chip has the bandwidth for it. And let's talk about that chip. The 8-core i9 beast inside of this is still 14nm Coffee Lake, so it's very similar in size and architecture to Intel chips going back to 2016 Skylake, despite having double the cores. But Intel's idling technology and Apple's undervolting and really smart fan settings mean that you actually get a quiet, usable laptop when you're not pushing it. But more demanding tasks will still put this improved cooling system to the test. Next year's 10nm Intel options, at the very least, will hopefully give even more battery life and just give the cooling system a break in extremely challenging situations. For now, this is just a compromise that we have to deal with. The graphics, however, are pretty exciting this generation because it's using AMD's fresh Navi architecture on 7nm. Now, the Navi architecture keeps up with NVIDIA chips and other laptops of this class, and in some cases even exceeds them. It creates great performance per watt. Compared to thicker, big boy gaming laptops, though, featuring RTX graphics, this still is kind of anemic. As a compromise, though, which, as I've mentioned, that's what a good laptop is all about, I think Apple made a really good bet here, and I kind of get why they made the decision to stick with AMD, given the great power efficiency that allows the MacBook to still be relatively thin and just need less than 100 watts of power, which is what allows it to charge over USB-C instead of needing a proprietary port. Apple just isn't interested in making super thick, non-USB-C charging laptops, for better or worse, so this is about the beefiest class of MacBook we can expect to see. Considering that's what we get, I think most people will be pretty happy, because this is definitely far and away one of the biggest graphics jumps to come to a MacBook in years. So that's exciting for those who just would use this GPU to render 3D content, video effects, and hey, even game a little bit, maybe in Windows Boot Camp. So what did Apple miss this year besides having the ports and touch bar unchanged? Well, while the speakers and microphone really are great, I wish I could say the same about the webcam because, unfortunately, its quality, well, it isn't quite up there. Likely due to the extremely thin screen components of these MacBooks. Now, it seems like it would behoove Apple to tweak this design with a slightly thicker display to accommodate a better sensor for the webcam. Or Apple could just look around and see if there's a better sensor to use in the existing size, because this hasn't changed much since 2012. And given the popularity of web conferencing apps like Zoom, that's a problem for a lot of professionals who would be interested in this laptop. The MacBook Pro overall is a great compromise with some caveats, as all compromises have. The disappointment comes in the fact that this is all we get. While I love the improvements made and the fact that Apple's doubled how much storage you get for your money on upgrades and other small consumer-focused tweaks like that, I really would love to see a more ambitious redesign given it's been 3 years, and this just isn't it. Intel's still limiting Apple, even if Apple's doing their best with the Core i9s they're given, and overall I just feel like this isn't as futuristic as a device like the 2018 iPad Pro. But it is a much more usable laptop for the professional users who will likely rely on it to work most for their jobs. And for those angry pros, this is a pretty tasty pacifier and a great compromise.